I spent 10 years learning about using lending for wealth creation so that you don't have to. During the last 10 years as a banker and then a broker, structuring over $500 million in property financing. And in that time, I've learned exactly how to use lending as a tool to build wealth, not just to buy property. Now, most people think a loan is just a loan. You borrow money, you buy a house, and then you pay it back. But that's not how wealthy investors think about lending. You see, they use debt strategically to acquire assets, maximize tax deductions, and scale portfolios faster than they ever could just using their own cash. I'm Diane Hamad, mortgage broker and ex-banker who's structured over $500 million in property financing. In this video, I'm breaking down the exact strategies I've learned over the last decade about how to use lending for wealth creation. I'm going to give you 7 strategies, and honestly, the best ones are at the end. Strategy 6 and 7 are how investors scale past a 5 property portfolio when most people get stuck at 2 or 3. So you want to stick around for those because that's where the real wealth building happens. This is everything I wish someone had taught me when I started, so you don't have to spend 10 years figuring it out yourself. Now let's get into it. Strategy 1, understanding good debt versus bad debt. The first thing that you need to understand is that not all debt is the same. There's good debt and there's bad debt. And wealthy people maximize good debt while avoiding bad debt as much as they can, if not completely. Good debt is used to buy assets that either appreciate in value, generate income, or do both. Now, investment properties, businesses, equipment, that produces revenue. The asset pays for the debt and it puts money back into your pocket. And most importantly, the interest on good debt is usually tax deductible. Bad debt is used to buy liabilities, things that lose value the moment you buy them and cost you money every single month. Cars, holidays, consumer goods. You're paying interest on things that are worth less every month and giving you absolutely nothing back, and that interest is not tax deductible. Now, here's the shift that happened for me when I was working as a banker. I saw 2 types of clients. One type would come in and borrow $800,000 for their home, then spend the next 15 years aggressively paying it off. They'd throw every spare dollar at the home loan because they wanted to be debt-free. And at the end of that 15 years, they owned one property worth maybe $1.5 million after growth. The other type would keep their home loan manageable and use their income and borrowing capacity to buy investment properties. They'd borrow $800,000 for their home, keep it at a stable level, and then over the same 15 years, they'd use equity and income to buy 3 or 4 investment properties. At the end of the 15 years, they own their home worth $1.5 million, plus 3 investment properties worth maybe $2.5 million combined. So now their total wealth is $4 million versus $1.5 million. So it's the exact same time frame, the exact same income level, but you get very, very different outcomes because one understood good debt and how to use it, and the other didn't and was really, really afraid of it. Wealthy investors don't avoid debt. They use good debt strategically, and like I said, they really, really avoid the bad debt. Another type of client that I would see, two levels of income. One of those clients is using their money to buy property or using that money to buy businesses, using lending to buy businesses, okay? When you use lending to buy businesses, I've done it myself before. We've acquired other brokerages in the past. Effectively, what you do is that you say take out $300,000, for example, okay? But then that business is making you money every single month. Okay, it's making you money. It's the same thing, very, very similar to buying an investment property. You're using debt to buy the business. The business is now going to pay you, okay? And then you make more revenue on top of what the business is paying you. Then effectively that debt means nothing to you anymore. The next way you can do it is if you use equipment. So we have clients who own lots of bakeries. So they own 4 or 5 bakeries, okay? And their strategy they didn't start out with a lot of money. And their strategy from the start was they use lots of debt, okay? Debt that people would probably be afraid of, but it's made them a lot of money now. They use lots of debt to buy these bakeries, okay, to buy these already active businesses. And then they also needed to buy all the equipment, all the machines, the ovens, everything they needed in order to bake. They purchased it using finance as well, okay? But their business is so profitable every year, and it's allowed them to grow their business at a level that otherwise would not have been able to do so if they hadn't used the good debt, okay? Versus other clients that I've seen that have high income levels, like I'm talking $300,000 plus households, maxed out credit cards that they're always trying to get ahead of and pay down. Completely maxed out credit cards. We've got car loans. We've got cashing out on the home loan to do things like go on holidays and to always try and catch up on the credit cards again. These same people, if they manage their money correctly, they could also be building a property portfolio rather than being out every single month just trying to cover this bad debt that's done nothing for them. Okay, effectively, they could have been using that money to grow a portfolio, and that's not a situation that I think you should be in if you're trying to build wealth. Now, let's move on to the second thing I learned. The second thing I learned is how to use equity to scale a portfolio without needing to save cash for every deposit. This is probably one of my favorite things in lending. Okay. Here's how most people think property investing works. You save 100 grand, for example, for a deposit. You buy property 1, then you spend another 5 years saving the next $100,000 deposit. You buy property 2, then another 5 years, and you get the point here. Okay. At that pace, it's going to take you at least 15 years to own 3 properties. That's really not how you build wealth fast. The way you build it is you use your equity. Here's how it works. You buy your first property for $800,000 with $160,000 deposit. A few years later, that property is worth $950,000 and you've paid the loan down slightly. You now have about $250,000 in equity. Instead of waiting to save another $100,000 in cash, you can access that equity. You go to the lender, you refinance, you cash out, say $120,000 to use as a deposit on your next property. The lender revalues your property at $950,000, sees you've got the equity, and then approves you to increase your home loan. Okay, then you pull out that $120,000 and use it as a deposit towards an $800,000 property, and now you own 2 properties. A few years later, now you've got 2 properties compounding for you. Okay, it gets really, really magical when there's more than one doing the work for you. You've got 2 doing it for you. Property 1 is worth, say, 1.1. Property 2 is 900. You can access another 150 across the 2 properties. And now that's a deposit on property 3. And you just keep compounding and doing that. It is so magical. I can't explain it to you. It's so magical when you see your properties increasing in valuation and you suddenly have this usable cash that you didn't have to save. You didn't have to do anything for it. A lot of the time, you don't have to wait too long, depending on where you buy. If you're buying, say, a blue chip asset in a really, really good area, okay, valuations go up literally the next day sometimes, depending on what bank you go with. Because what happens when you purchase a property, the lender will never go higher than what the contract of sale says. That's just the rule. They're not going to go higher than the contract of sale ever for purchases. So what effectively happens is for example, you'll buy a property with lender A, okay? They approve the valuation amount. You've bought it for $1.5 million, for example. Then what your broker can effectively do, and what we do for our clients is, if they're wanting to access equity straight away, is the next day you run valuations with, say, 5 to 10 other lenders, okay? And then you'll see other lenders will come back at 155, 16, 165, just this massive scale. And people really, really get stunned of the variance between valuations and lenders. This massive scale of different valuations depending on the lender. Okay, then you suddenly have cash that you didn't have the day before. You suddenly have $100,000 in cash ready to go. As long as you can service it, you can access that money. That's very powerful. Extremely powerful. In a matter of a day, you can have $100,000, $150,000 of cash ready for you to use. That's the power of equity. That's why it's one of my favorite things. And let's say one property, it's amazing. And then you have 2 properties doing the work for you. So now suddenly you have these 2 properties that you can access cash at any time. You would not have been able to save that cash during that time. No way. It takes a long time to save money. Okay. The property is just saving it for you. It's going up in value. That's the way properties work. They go up in value. So when you have 2 properties, okay, 2 of them are doing the work for you. Suddenly you have all this cash freed up. And then you can take out the cash from those properties and invest in other things. Or you can take out the cash and add value to your investment properties so that they generate more income for you. There's so many things that you can do with that equity once you have it there. And equity, like I said, is one of my favorite things ever with property. Okay, so let's move on to strategy 3, and that's structuring debt to maximize tax deductions. And another one of my favorite things. I'm a little bit biased here, but there's a lot I do like about property. The third thing I learned is how critical loan structure is for tax deductions. And this is where most investors leave tens of thousands of dollars on the table, okay, if not more. Tens of thousands of dollars on the table every year, compounded over a loan term, is a lot of money. When you borrow money, the ATO looks at what you use that money for to determine if the interest is tax deductible. If you borrowed it to buy an investment property, the interest is deductible. If you borrowed it for personal use like buying your home or a car, the interest is no longer tax deductible. And the problem is that most people don't structure their loans properly from the start, okay, and they contaminate their deductibility without even realizing. Here's the most common mistake. You've got a home loan of $600,000. You aggressively pay it down using redraw and get it to $400,000. Okay. Now you've got $200,000 sitting in redraw. So let's say you want to buy an investment property. You pull that $200,000 out of the redraw and then use it as a deposit. The ATO treats that $200,000 as part of your original home loan, which was for personal use. Even though you're using it to buy an investment, the interest on that $200,000 is not tax deductible. At 6% interest, that's $12,000 per year in interest you can't claim. At the 45% tax bracket, you just lost $5,400 in tax savings every single year. If you'd used an offset account instead of redraw, your loan balance would have stayed at $600,000. The $200,000 would have sat in the offset, reducing your interest, so you're getting the same benefit as a redraw. And when you pulled it out for investment purposes, you could have restructured it properly through debt recycling to make it fully deductible. The other critical structure is loan splits. Every time you access equity for a different purpose, you need to split that into a separate loan account. If you mix everything together in one loan, the ATO can challenge your tax deductions because you've got mixed purpose debt. So let's say you buy an investment property for $800,000 with a 640 loan. A few years later, you want to access $100,000 in equity to buy another property. Don't just increase the loan to 740 and call it done. Split the loan. Keep the original 640 in split 1 for the first property. Put the new $100,000 in split 2 for the second property. Now you've got clean separation and both are fully deductible. I've worked with clients who had 5 or 6 properties all structured incorrectly with mixed loans and redraw contamination. When we cleaned it up and restructured everything properly with splits and offset accounts, they were suddenly claiming an extra $15,000 to $20,000 per year in tax deductions they'd been missing out on. That's real money. That's just, if you're missing out on that, please contact your broker, contact somebody who knows what they're doing with this kind of stuff and your accountant, and just absolutely get this cleaned up because it's a massive one. That brings me to strategy 4, which is debt recycling to convert bad debt into good debt. The fourth strategy is debt recycling. Okay, this is one of the most powerful tools I've learned for turning non-deductible debt into deductible debt. Now, here's the concept. You've got a $1 million home loan that's non-deductible because you live in the property. You've also got $200,000 sitting in your offset account. Now, most people would either use that $200,000 to pay down the home loan or use it as a deposit for an investment. Okay, they'll just take it straight out of the offset and buy an investment property with it. If you use it as a deposit directly, you've just used $200,000 of your own cash and your $1 million home loan is still sitting there non-deductible. Do not do that, please. Here's the smart play. You use that $200,000 from your offset to make a lump sum payment against your home loan. Your loan balance drops from $1 million to $800,000 immediately. Okay. Then you create a new loan split for $200,000 for investment purposes and cash out the money and pop it back into the offset account. So a new offset account is linked to the new $200,000 split, and that $200,000 is sitting against a $200,000 loan. The difference is your actual home loan has reduced. You've paid $200,000 off your home loan, and you've taken out $200,000 of investment lending. There are so many benefits to this. You have a smaller home loan now. Okay, you've just completely paid it down, and by paying it down and taking out that $200,000 for investment purposes, you're now using $200,000 of tax deductible debt to buy an investment property and to grow your wealth. You've converted $200,000 of non-deductible debt into tax deductible debt without increasing your total borrowing. That's the biggest key here. You're not increasing your borrowing. Borrowing is the same. And at 6% interest, that's $12,000 per year in interest. At the 45% tax bracket, you're saving $5,400 per year in tax. Over 10 years, that's $54,000 back in your pocket just from structuring the debt correctly. And you can keep doing this. Every time you build up more cash in the offset or pay down your home loan further, you repeat the process. Lump sum payment, new split, cash out the offset, use it for investing. Now, gradually, you're going to convert more and more of your non-deductible home loan into deductible investment debt. I've had clients convert over $500,000, $600,000, even $800,000 of their home loan into deductible debt over time using this strategy. The tax savings are massive and they're too big to miss and to get this wrong, so please get that strategy right. Strategy 5 is understanding how banks assess serviceability. The fifth thing I learned, and this is critical if you want to scale a portfolio, is exactly how banks assess your ability to borrow more. Now, most people think borrowing capacity is just about your income. So if you earn $150,000, the bank will lend you X amount, okay? And that's kind of true, but it's a little bit more nuanced than that, especially when you're buying investment properties. When you own investment properties, the bank looks at the rental income you're receiving and the loan repayments you're making on those properties, but they don't assess it at face value. Now, most banks will only count 80% of your rental income to allow for vacancies and expenses. So if you're getting $600 per week in rent, which is $31,200 a year, they're only crediting you with $24,960 in their serviceability calculation. On the expense side, they're assessing your loan repayments at a buffer rate, which is usually 3% above the actual interest rate. So if you're paying 6.5%, they're assuming that you're at 9.5%, which protects you. Okay, it's a nice safety blanket. And that means even though your actual repayments might be $3,500 a month, they're calculating them as if they're $4,200 per month. Now, this is why serviceability becomes a limiting factor for most investors. You might have plenty of equity, but the bank says you can't service another loan because their calculations show that you're maxed out. The next thing is use different lenders. When I was at the bank and people would come to me, I used to think that was their only option. I used to be like, oh, no, that's the only amount you can borrow. Sorry, so-and-so bank says that this is your maximum borrowing capacity and that's it. No, when I got out of the bank and I became a broker, I realized, hold on a second, all these banks have all these different policies, okay? And amongst these different policies means that they favor some income more than others, which means, like the example I gave before of the shading, rental income shading, okay? Some lenders shade rental income less than others. So some lenders shade it to 80%, some lenders shade it to 90%, okay? Which gives you another 10% a year in the rental income that you're receiving. The next thing is some non-bank lenders don't add a servicing buffer because they're not as heavily regulated by APRA, okay? Which means they don't need to add a servicing buffer to your repayments. If your repayments are $3,500 a month, that's how they assess it. They assess it at $3,500 a month. They don't assess it at $4,200 a month. That's an extra $700 a month back into serviceability. Massive, massive things. But here's the most important thing, okay? And it's something I talk about all the time. And it was actually my absolute first lesson and first loan ever as a banker. I had a client doing a trust loan. Okay. He was an accountant and he had lots of trust. Okay. But when I was doing this loan and I felt like I was coming to some sort of an epiphany and realization. I was like, oh, wait, hold on a second. It's in the trust. The debt is out here. His lending's there. When I was structuring and putting the whole loan together and processing it, it really, really occurred to me and it sparked my passion and interest in trust lending. Firstly, I was the only person in my team who knew how to do this. And I was the newest lender, by the way. Like I said, it was my first deal. Secondly, the more I started to speak to this accountant and understand things, I really, really realized the power of trust and how to structure lending through trust. And this takes me to strategy 6, is use trust structures to scale beyond your serviceability limits. Okay, and that's strategy 6. It also links to strategy 5, but I really, really want to get into this and make it its own strategy because it is so powerful. This is how investors break through the ceiling that stops most people at 2 or 3 properties. I see it and I do it all the time. When you own properties in your personal name, every property affects your borrowing capacity. Okay, the more properties you buy, the less borrowing capacity you have. So let's say this is your borrowing capacity. You buy in your personal name, and it just gets less and less and less, and it reduces. Okay, your serviceability keeps shrinking. When you hold properties in a trust, the lender assesses them differently. If the trust is cash flow neutral or cash flow positive, meaning the rent covers the loan repayments and expenses, many lenders don't factor those liabilities into your personal serviceability at all. So I'll give you an example. You own 3 properties in your personal name. The bank says you're maxed out on serviceability and you can't borrow anymore. You set up a family trust, okay? You structure it so the property is cash flow neutral, the rent covers the loan repayments. Because the trust is cash flow neutral, the lender doesn't add the liability to your personal income assessment. Your personal serviceability stays intact. You can buy property 5, set up another trust and make it cash flow neutral. And you just keep going. So let's say your borrowing capacity, for example, is $2 million, okay? And you've used up $1.2 million of your borrowing capacity, okay? Which leaves us with $800,000 left. And you're like, hey, I'm currently at 2 properties. Okay, I want to be able to get to 5. If you buy your next one in your personal name, then you've used that all up. You can't do anything anymore. You can't get to 5. You're capped out at 3. What you do, like I said, you set up the family trust. Okay, then you use that $800,000 borrowing capacity within the trust to buy your next property. And then once that gets to cash flow positive or cash flow neutral, then you can set up your next trust, okay, to use that $800,000 again to buy your next property, okay? And then once that gets to cash flow positive or neutral, you set up your third trust and you do the same thing again. So you do it across the 3, and now you're in a position that you would never have been able to be in unless you paid off all that other debt or sold those properties, okay? You would not have been able to get to 5 properties in your personal name with that borrowing capacity. You would have completely capped yourself out. And the reason why you can keep using that borrowing capacity in the trust is because once it gets to a cash flow positive or neutral position, the banks can effectively disregard that debt, okay, because the trust owns it and you don't own it in your personal name. You technically don't. Diana Hamad doesn't own those properties, okay? The Diana Hamad's family trust owns those properties. Legally, when you set up another entity, okay, that entity is like another human. It's like an individual. That's how you have to frame it in your mind, okay? And that entity can borrow money effectively. And it's not, that entity is borrowing and buying property, but I'm not. So that's the entity that's owning those properties. That's the entity responsible for it. And Diana Hamad is not. And that's how you can continue scaling that way, obviously to a point where you're comfortable with the amount of properties you have. And that's why trust structures are very, very powerful and are also one of my favorite things about lending. Strategy 7 is buying when nobody else will. Okay. So I'm a big fan, and I always say time in market beats timing the market. Absolutely. But we are currently seeing something in the current market, and I've spoken about it in other videos, where buyers are currently scared because of interest rate rises, because of media discussions, changes in government policies, etc. Buyers are currently scared about entering the market. When that happens, is a really, really good time for you to have the confidence to be able to buy. Okay, rather than waiting for peak prices to happen again, which is fine. I've bought in peak prices before. It is what it is. When you buy, the property still appreciates in value. But you need to know an opportunity when it comes up. Okay, you need to know an opportunity when you see one. And in the current market at the moment, the way the cycle is and what cycle we're at in the property cycle, it is a very good time to buy. And I myself am going to be buying during this time, okay, because transaction volumes are down. And this is exactly the phase where smart investors position themselves before the next wave of growth becomes obvious to everybody else. When I was working as a banker during different market cycles, the clients who built the most wealth were always the ones who bought when everybody else was hesitant. They weren't trying to time the exact bottom, like, no, they'll get lower. No. They were just making sure they were active during the period when good opportunities were available. They understood that buying during uncertainty, when you can negotiate better prices and face less competition, positions you to capture significantly more growth than buying during the boom, when everybody else agrees that it's safe. Don't wait for everybody else to feel like it's safe, because generally that's when it's too late to snatch up a good opportunity. And I've spoken about this before, that we were looking at a property. Let's call it, I'm not going to give the detail. Let's just call it a $2 million property. Okay. They wanted $2 million for it, for example. Okay. We thought it was worth $1.5 million. So we said, hey, when we looked at it, and this was before the rate rise this year, the second rate rise this year, we looked at the property and we're like, hey, look, we think it's worth 1.5. We don't think it's worth $2 million. And they thought, nah, we're taking it to market. No worries. They took it to market. The rates went up. Guess who was calling us? The real estate agent was calling us to say, hey, are you still willing to offer $1.5 million for that property, because the buyers are willing to sell it at that price? And we're like, oh, we've got our eye on something else now. We're thinking about it, but get rid of that. We're thinking about it part. Get rid of all that. But keep the real estate agent called us. And the agent called us and he told us that they're willing to drop their price. And that's what I mean when I'm saying that now is a good time to buy, because buyer sentiment is low. And I love when buyer sentiment is low, because that means I'm going to snatch up good properties. People are going to start panic selling. They're going to be worried that they're not going to be able to get their price, okay? Because people are impatient and they don't want to wait. Firstly. Secondly, there's less competition. People are probably not going to be taking their properties to auction during this time, because they're worried about whether or not it's going to clear at auction, if they can sell it prior to auction. I'm friends with lots of real estate agents, and we do business with lots of real estate agents, okay? And obviously, they're going to encourage their sellers to sell prior to auction to people who are making offers. because they're not going to risk taking it to auction and it passing through and then getting snatched up at a much, much cheaper price. So keep that in mind. That's strategy number 7. That brings me to the end of my video. These 7 strategies are what I've learned over 10 years of working in lending. First as a banker, approving loans, then as a broker, structuring them for my clients. Understanding good debt versus bad debt changes how you think about borrowing. Using equity instead of waiting to save cash speeds up your portfolio growth. Structuring loans properly with splits and offset accounts maximizes your tax deductions. Debt recycling converts non-deductible debt into deductible debt. Understanding serviceability helps you work with banks instead of against them. Trust structures let you scale beyond personal serviceability limits. And timing your purchases during market cycles positions you to capture growth instead of chasing it. These aren't complicated strategies. They're just not taught anywhere or not taught well enough. Banks don't explain them because it's not their job to help you build wealth. It's their job to lend you money. Most brokers don't explain them because, well, firstly, they don't understand them. And secondly, they're very, very focused on getting you approved for one loan and not building a long-term strategy. But if you understand how lending actually works, you can use it as a tool to build wealth faster than you ever could using just your own income and savings. I spent 10 years learning this. You don't have to. You just need to understand these strategies and start applying them. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe. If you have any questions, leave a comment. We upload new videos every single week, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video.